So an overview on the company. TransAlta is operated primarily in Alberta. That being said, we do have assets all around North America and in Western Australia. We operate in the wind platform, hydro platform, coal to gas. Until recently, we had coal units as well. We're in the middle of converting one from coal to natural gas in Washington State right now. That was our last coal unit. We've got a bunch of gas and grids in Western Australia supporting primarily BHP and their mining operations. So our fleet it's a big mix. I'll speak about that a little bit more, but wind, hydro, thermal, peakers, GTs, traditional thermal, pretty much everything except nuclear. We've even got some solar panels on the roof of a school in North Carolina. So we went through a strange M&A period there a few years ago. Just another little slide there. So I mentioned that future gas conversion. We used to call that retirement, and then we were able to connect with an off-taker to add some stability in Washington over the next few years. So that was a big win for us. So a little bit about the resurrection of M&D at TransAlta, and this will get a little bit messy because there's a lot that's happened, and I'll try to keep it streamlined, right? So I had I guess comically in my mind titled this "From Ashes, the Phoenix Rises." TransAlta was an early adopter in M&D. Ian tells me that it was 2008 or 2007 that we put in our first SmartSignal instance within the company. That was a great opportunity. That grew. It was effectively used in the thermal part of the business when we had a lot of reliability engineers and performance engineers looking at things. But it did get a little too big, and as market prices in Alberta started to decline, as the province got overbuilt, and our exposure to low market prices became more relevant in our day-to-day, we ended up having to look at that a little more closely. And at the time, it had 8 FTEs, a $10 million budget, and it wasn't really being used effectively. The original implementation of our M&D center was probably good to begin, but it grew too big, and it got to the point where it wasn't integrated in the business anymore. It was a head office function that just sent out random emails, right, to vast lists of people with no accountability, no action, no traceability, and no discernible outcomes that were effective. And so, when somebody was making budget cuts, they saw a $10 million line item that nobody could really explain, gone, okay? It's not to say that we did the right thing by getting rid of the software altogether. We did let it sit and linger and grow old and decay, I would say. And so when I joined the company 3 years ago, I said, are we using anything for like an APR tool at all? And the comment that came back was, yeah, we've got SmartSignal. And I said, great, show me. And it was in bad shape, right? People were going to it when something went wrong, not monitoring it continuously. Of course, because it hadn't been maintained, all it did was throw false positives. It was the worst of all potential things. And so there was actually a very bad taste in people's mouths about SmartSignal. Right? There was this mistrust. So not only did we have to start from nothing, we started in a hole on this project. The good news is, and I'm talking about this now because this is key to our success, and it would be key to success for anybody involved in this space, right? Leadership engagement. So I mentioned I joined the company 3 years ago. 4 years ago, they got a new generation EVP. And that person looked around and said, we aren't doing asset management correctly in this business. We're lean, we have a small team, we're not making best use of data, we're not doing the right things currently in the business. And of course, that's just a consequence of where they were in their life cycle. So there was a renewed focus from the EVP of generation, basically our COO, and he brought me in to basically spend time with this and get this going. So it wasn't my only task, but it seems to be becoming my primary task these days. So right away we had leadership, not only leadership endorsement, but really leadership expectations. They'd come from an environment where M&D was effective. They didn't see it where we were. I want to build something out that's effective. Now, there's been some roadblocks, but we're getting there. The other thing that we did was we did some early engagements on just identifying what our lost productivity was. At TransAlta, our primary metric for profitability, shall we say, is availability. If we can drive availability, if you can say that you're doing something to increase availability, thumbs up, go do it, right? How much does it cost? Okay, go. So we identified, $9 million on our wind fleet that would be available on an annual basis just due to underperformance. And we looked at something around $13 million in hydro availability shortfall. Interesting thing about our hydro, almost all of our hydro is on the Bow River. The Bow River is primarily fed by mountain runoff, like melt. And so, believe it or not, our hydro operations at 30% capacity are primarily driven by the water movement. So every week we put together a water movement plan, and then from that water movement plan we derive an electricity production plan. So it's a little bit backwards. I know in the States a lot of places are run a river or they're big on reservoirs and they're only responding to market. But in our case, this comes down to like, were we available at the peak hours? No, we weren't. Or did we spend our water wisely in that week? No, we didn't. So there were a lot of opportunities to improve in that space. Now, of course, we didn't show this number publicly to like the executives. You don't want to tell them there's $20 million on the table because the next thing that they do is go looking for it. But we know that there's money to be had, right? So that really endorsed our opportunity to go do. So my apologies for the draft slide, TBD, but there we are. I think I walked through that pretty well. So from a digital maturity perspective, the other thing that was lacking for us was our, digital maturity and basically how we were leveraging our OT, what we were doing in OT, and where we wanted to be. So I think most people would see a slide like this and go, yes, we recognize it. There's the pre-digital plant. We had some sites that weren't even connected to our main historian. In fact, this year, one of our biggest successes has been just putting one board up that shows the current production across the fleet. When I joined, we weren't able to do that. And to be honest, today we still can't do it because we do not have connectivity to some of our sites with sufficient fidelity to say what our current production is from that site. So it's a real mixed bag, right? So bringing in something like SmartSignal, which feels like an advanced tool, into an environment where your OT is really not all that robust was a bit of a challenge, but we knew that it was the right thing to do, and if we didn't start, we wouldn't get started. So we've done that. So what are we going after in our business, right? It's on the wind side, I mentioned the underperformance. Reliability, if you're in the thermal business and you've never dealt with wind, it would blow your mind how often a wind turbine trips, right? If you're lucky, it's once a month. If you're on average, it's like once a day, right? Wind turbines trip a lot. And so the faster you can get them restarted, the faster you can understand why they tripped and get them restarted, the sooner you make your production back, right? And again, availability is key. So 97% is our target. That's a pretty good industry standard. And we were running down around, in some cases, 89, 90. So we were looking to get that back up. Now, I'm not going to say that M&D did all of that, right? Obviously, because the whole business was looking at how can we improve our availability in wind, everything from our maintenance practice to our, our scheduling practice and everything. But we have a role there to play for sure. On the hydro side, I mentioned the operating profiles. So we have units that are rated for 160 megawatts. Sometimes they make 160 megawatts, but often we run them at 13, right? So they are as low load as we can possibly get them because we want to conserve the water and respect the water plan. Which means for us on hydro, putting kind of the advanced monitoring diagnostics, which is what we're calling it, the correlation of maintenance data and real-time operating data to understand what the real rough zones are on our unit and where we can, basically make an economic trade-off between if you operate here too long, you may make better money, but you're going to end up having to do an overhaul a year earlier, right? So looking at that trade-off, that's part of the accountability from us in this space. Technology, we're looking after a simplification of our ecosystem. So we really like the idea of streamlining in that space. And then making sure that we have the right processes. I was talking to Janet a minute ago, and she asked me, if you could redo what you did, would you do it differently? And I said, well, I don't think we would. I think we're pretty close to having a system that works. We learned from our past experience, and sending emails to the masses doesn't work. We started on our reporting process before we did anything, right? So even before the software was in the room, we were talking about how are we going to action things and then monitor how they come back and embed that importance. So that was a key thing for us. Again, would be remiss not to talk about AM&D for a little bit. Again, the A for us is Advanced Monitoring Diagnostics. I didn't put that in there, but I think we have some interesting things that we do that does take it a little bit beyond using APR. So I'm going to spend a second on this slide just because Chris was in the room a few days ago and he asked a question about why would I bother with an APR tool if my vibration stuff works just fine and gives me what I need. So I've got a little bit of an explanation on that. One of the hardest things beyond the EVP, my COO, beyond getting him on board, because he was already on board, was getting the rest of the business on board. And I've spent a fair bit of time in this space. I was previously with one of the big generators in Ontario, helped them stand up their M&D center, but it was also a question of like, what is really in this for me? And people really struggled with the notion of that PF curve and why does it matter, right? Everybody in this room knows what a PF curve. Everybody knows that they'd rather know what is happening sooner than later. And the thing that allowed me, that really clicked in my mind, that made it click in other people's mind, I found, was reminding them that condition, AM&D or M&D is not new. It's just condition-based maintenance, right? It's a tool for condition-based maintenance. You are acclimated to thermocouples, oil analysis, vibration monitoring, and you're happy with those and you're getting most of what you need. This is just an evolution of that practice, right? This is just a digital tool that is allowing us to do all of those things only when absolutely necessary. It's giving us advance notice and we're going to react to that advance notice. The problem, of course, is often you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it, right? Because it is early, so you're learning that onset. So for us, this was a big slide in kind of moving the business along with understanding why it was important for us to be doing what we're doing and how this is really not new. It's just a new way of doing an old thing, right? So on that vibration analysis situation, right, like historically you would go in when something starts to vibrate visibly or audibly and you would take some readings and go, yeah, it is broken. I should probably do something about that. With our monitoring and diagnostics center, of course, we get an earlier alert. So you're in there earlier. You're potentially dealing with repairs instead of replaces, as one example. The other nice thing about M&D is typically you can find the point of onset. So if you know exactly when something started to deviate, you can look back in your logs, look back in your operating profile and say, well, what happened in that moment? Right? So that was a big one for us in selling people. And then, of course, at some point, we'd like to get to the point where our M&D center is doing automatic diagnosis and kicking out failure modes based on 1X, 2X, whatever, right? I mentioned the runner operating valve. So in the past, we're just kind of winging it, listening, and operating our units where we think it's okay to operate them. I'm not going to lie, we have some of our operating profile curves are just in Sharpie on a wall somewhere, right? I should point out, TransAlta has been around since 1909. Okay, so we have assets that are well over 100 years old, some of our hydro units, right? So the practice of operating those units has evolved over time considerably, and in some cases we're ahead, and in other places we're playing catch up, and this would be one of those cases. So ideally we'd be operating, we would be identifying our operating envelopes with data, and then moving forward we would like to be operating those continuously monitored and optimized automatically with counters and equivalent, like an EOH model for hydro would be an interesting thing that we're trying to get to. And then feeding that directly into our commercial team so that they understand the trade-offs of if I operate in this time zone or if I operate in this regime for this amount of time, it costs me this much maintenance, right? And then so that actually gets carried through in the overall benefit. It's aspirational. The last thing I'll say is on the wind side, so as an example, I mentioned, we have turbines that fault on overheating for one reason or another. Restart can take an hour or a day. It depends on how well the operator responds. It depends on whether we've got an in-house operation or if we have an LTSA or an external operator. We have both. Sometimes we would trip a unit on a Friday afternoon, and if it was a long weekend, you might not even get it restarted until Tuesday, right? So that was a challenge for us. So what we'd like to see is that operations would have advance notice so that they can derate a turbine rather than allow it to trip, right? That would be a great thing, data-driven decision there. And then ideally our SCADA would just see that derated automatically, send an alert, and come back when the conditions change. So there's a good view of how we can apply the technology across our fleet, right? And some of the benefits that come. And the nice thing about a lot of these is they are truly ongoing benefit, right? So you're creating this thing. It's not a situation where you've built it, you've got what you get, and then you move on and forget about it. Just a quick slide to put some emphasis on the OT situation. You're not meant to be able to read this. It's more about the color map. These are our typical models that we would like to see built out on some of our hydro units. Red is there's a missing piece of key data. Yellow is the data exists, but it's not coming to the historian one way or another, right? It's a local maybe. And then gray is we don't have it, right? Or it isn't necessary for the model. You'll notice there are no green slots, okay? We have a lot of work to do in instrumentation. Excuse me. And that's another part of my role. So we're consolidating monitoring and diagnostics, performance engineering, and call it the SME and the ownership of our OT space all in one spot, right? And so that allows these two groups that are severely dependent on one another to have that line of sight to one another. So the core elements is the last one on kind of where we're going and what we're doing. From a process perspective, I mentioned that we started with process, right? We want to map out our processes. We want to understand how information is going to flow out and how results are going to come back. And we focused on a change management plan from day one. That is the single hardest part. I mentioned that we were already in a hole on SmartSignal. TransAlta was also, in the pendulum swing of centralized versus decentralized, back to centralized, back to decentralized. We are coming out of a decentralized model, trying to bring the right things back into the middle where it matters, right? So you get that consistency where it matters, but flexibility where it's important to have that. So we put an implementation lead in place. We hired one engineer to focus in that space as well. We put money in front of it. We have done the analysis on where we are from our sensors, what we need to hit our top 2%, our major pieces of equipment, and that sort of thing. And so that's all good. The planning is there. On the data side, yep, that's part of the OT plan. We are upgrading on our data management side, our true data management side. From the IT side of things, they are building out a data lake for us right now where we're going to have all of our data, the one source of truth. So that'll be useful. We will not use that. We will go straight to the historians just to keep it a little bit quicker and stuff. But the rest of the business will have access to that data lake, and we'll know that we are the agent for that. And then lastly, SmartSignal. We installed it as a pilot on our hydro sites and a few wind sites. We've got 27 wind sites. If you know how the SmartSignal pricing model works, it's a weird thing, right? Because we've got like over 1,000 wind turbines producing a bunch of models, but each one of those, a bunch of alarms and a bunch of models, but each of those wind turbines is not individually responsible for very much income. So when you have to distribute it that way and you align that with the pricing model, you got to kind of jump through some hoops and make it make sense, and better make sure that your output transformers are included in that and that sort of thing. So we got through it. That was part of our partnership model, right? Ian was in the room and we worked on it pretty well, had a lot of good support. So I'll talk about that in a moment. So the partnership model, this is really what I'd like to talk about, despite the fact that I've been talking for 20 minutes and haven't even got to the important part from my perspective. So partnership mentality, this is the single biggest thing that I think is important in developing how you want to roll things out with your vendor or with the service provider that's working with you. Again, when I showed up at TransAlta and when the current leadership arrived, there was a lot going on, shall we say. And I've summarized the way I see things, basically like we need to make better and fewer friends. We had a lot of technology. We had a lot of, I think there's 50 different platforms that we use from an IT perspective. Our 27 wind sites had 17 different SCADAs associated with them. And just as I was arriving, they were putting in a SCADA overlay to at least unify that platform for the operators in the control center. But even now, they're not even crazy about that overlay. So some of them use some of them use the overlay exclusively. Some of them pull up, for the GE wind turbines, they like that interface, so they pull that up instead. We're also in 11 different jurisdictions, so it makes their lives very complicated, right? So consolidation of that into a single platform is a great example of what we're trying to do. Similarly, there was no APM software at all. And to be clear, I'm not really talking about APM today. I'm focusing on the SmartSignal side of things. But, we look around and go, who does it make sense to associate with that as we go further down this road, we can continue to build out what we want for our organization, right? So we have these long-term goals that look at basically the core functions of APM, right? Your workflow management, your optimization functions, all of that. So we want to go somewhere where we don't need to be dealing with 17 different vendors for 17 different functions. We want one vendor that can do all of that for us. And it makes sense. We have a number of GE Vernova wind turbines. We have a massive fleet. Well, I say massive, but we have a pretty big fleet of LM6000s. I think we might have the biggest fleet of PAs, which is becoming an issue for us as well. But yeah, so there's that. We also have a number of their steam turbines and that sort of thing. So there's already a heavy footprint with GE, so it made sense for us to continue focusing on that. Our SCM people love it, right? They feel like we're getting preferential treatment. We do have the relationship that allows us to be more significant to one another, I think, which is also important. When we pick up the phone and we need help, we get help. Now, I think that happens for everybody, but we feel good about it. We feel like we're getting a level of attention that matters. And I mean, here I am giving this presentation, so that's a little something for me. From a mutual benefit perspective, it doesn't need to be strictly beneficial or strictly financial from our perspective. I mentioned the intangibles about the quick response. Of course, from a partnership perspective, you do expect to get bigger with somebody and have that be reflected in the overall pricing models, and so that does matter, but it's not the only thing. For our client, they get our experience, helping them in the IMS center. They get another big client, they like that, so it's all good. It's good for both sides. And then the thing that really enables all of that, from my perspective, is a foundation of trust. And I'm a truster by nature, okay? I will trust people until they prove to me that I shouldn't. And some people can do that very quickly, right? And particularly vendors, vendors that will call you up and say, hey, I see you have this problem. We have a solution for that. Silence, right? Like, well, yeah, well, what do you want for that, right? And so instead of calling you up and saying, hey, we see you have a problem and we have a solution and this is what it is and this is what we think about implementing it, right? You get a different kind of relationship. So for me, the trust is important. It does require a degree of openness that perhaps can feel uncomfortable, right? We are taught to keep our cards close to our chest. There are a number of opportunities for people to take advantage of you either as a business or a person when you're having these conversations. But if you can't get to a point where you do trust that the vendor you're working with has your best interests at the forefront, and that in turn is what enables their success, then it's really hard to have these kinds of conversations. I'll get into it in the next slide. So for me, it's imperative that the client side feel comfortable and that the vendor side see the long-term plan. And so when I talk about partnership, that's the goal for me. And I'll say right now, TransAlta feels that way with GE. By the way, they didn't pay me to say that, okay? Not directly anyway, I don't know. So in practice, what does that look like, right? What do we feel is the investment that we're getting from the partner, right? So we've got workshops that have been enabled all across the board, right? They recognize that, yeah, you want to put in SmartSignal, but have you thought about the bigger picture? What are you really trying to achieve here with this initiative? What are the precursors that may or may not be in place? The number of times I've been told, we don't just want to sell you software, we want to enable your success, right, which I think is a key element of this relationship, is astounding, right? In fact, I don't think that anybody would have sold me the software if they weren't reasonably assured of our success. So I appreciate that. We do have quarterly business reviews and touch points. We discuss barriers to success and opportunities for improvement. So that's at all levels of the organization. We've got a team that works right at the ground level with the IMS team. They're dealing with the day-to-day issues. I meet regularly with the executive level to talk about, what are the overall barriers? What do we need to do collectively to be better as a team on improving our implementation? I've had some good open discussions. We've heard a lot today. just earlier about the roadmap and what's coming. Luke took the time, coincidentally, it was at Stampede season last year, so I'm not entirely sure what the impetus was there, but he did take the time to come to TransAlta's office about a year ago and have a candid conversation about roadmaps. And if you're looking to invest in a particular platform, this is the opportunity that we are offering, right? So that was a great investment and opportunity. And it does allow us to focus on the long-term success without really adding new information as it becomes more publicly available to the stack of available information, right? There's no gotcha moments where the team doesn't really know what's going on. Like, we know what the objective is long-term, and we're both working to get to where we want to be. So that's good. I mentioned the strong management focus. We have our strong leadership team, and GE has theirs. We're all committed to the same result. And then this is, and I don't know, like just edit, you might even want to say something here, but the result is we've really only been live on SmartSignal like properly for about a quarter, and I guess a half by now. And we've actually achieved a 52% actionable rate case, despite some of the comms defects we've had. And we've had some great confidence to trust the system completely and defer an urgent outage that we had online. So I'll talk about that in our use cases. We've identified some major maintenance practices at one of our defects at one of our flagship wind sites. Again, that'll be a use case. And we've been able to prioritize, and this is a neat one because it's not helping us identify imminent issues. We already know there are issues. So the software is helping us prioritize specific units that we want to work on first, right? So it's a prioritization tool, not an identification tool. And just to be clear, when I say 52% actionable rate case, I'm not saying that instead of 10%, active alarms and 90% false alarms. What I mean is by the time that we decide that it's time to start talking to the business and give them an update on, hey, we see something, you should probably go do something, 52% of those conversations result in a change in behavior, a maintenance activity or something. And the GE guys tell me that for 3 months worth of work, that's a pretty impressive rate. That might be a couple of years normally before you get to that point, because we had that framework in place, because we've got a strong team in place, because we've got a leadership engagement, and we have spent an enormous amount of time on comms and change management, right? So my leader of the AM&D Center, almost his full-time job is being in touch with the business, right? And letting them know what's going on. He sends out a biweekly email. We call it the biweekly brief, and it's just an update on what's new in M&D, what's coming out of M&D, what is M&D, what is APR, how does it all work, right? It touches all parts of the spectrum there. So again, at the working level, right? So we've got the SmartSignal IMS team. We are on level 1 right now. So there's biweekly engagements with the IMS team where they go over everything that's going on, as they would expect from level 1. We are looking to get to tier 2 as quickly as possible in wind, because again, there's a lot of activity happening there, and so we're looking to find ways to streamline that and get that in-house, and basically leverage our own learning in that space. There is mutual education. Every one of those biweekly meetings is not an opportunity to just discuss, here's what we see, go deal with it. It's a two-way conversation where our teams have conversations about what they're seeing, why they're seeing it. We haven't quite given GE the back-end access to our work management systems yet, and I'm not sure that we will, but our team will reach out into work management to see what's going on in that space, if there's any reason for what the IMS team is seeing in the background. And then there's been, I would say, a really important transaction where, again, M&D is a relatively new function for us. We have a wind specialist. We have someone who's pretty good at hydro. We're not working on the thermal side just yet, but we are getting there. But I think, I don't know if Bilal's in the room, but
He has to jump for a phone call and he's coming.
A phone call? What could be more important than this? Okay, all right. Oh, another customer. Forget it, I'm done. Bilal's been tremendous at educating my team on, hey, I know that you're seeing this, I know that you think it's important, but let me reassure you, this is very important. This is not a go do it in 3 months, this is a go do it now kind of situation. So that's been good. And then of course, I think we've probably got a significant amount of wind relative to what the IMS team has seen in the past. So, there's a mutual education in that space as well, right? So that's all good. We've also had a tremendous amount of support from the sales team. and from the development team on business case development, helping us make our case to the various parts of the business. It's not enough that our EVP wants it. It's not enough that I want it. We still need to make the shareholders happy about it and make sure that the board's happy. So we do need a business case there. M&D is a tricky one, right? My biggest complaint about one of my sorest touch points on M&D and the APR tools itself is how do you prove the value? Nobody cares about prevented loss. It didn't happen. It was never in our books. We were never going to deal with that. So we're looking at other ways to show the value of what we're getting out of M&D. In some cases, it's more of those technical things that I talked about earlier, where we say, look, on a continuous basis, this is happening. And without the tool, you lose that, right? So that's a good one. But yeah, the GE has a good model for how to account, right, and put dollar values on a catch or on an assist or whatever you want to call it. We don't call them catches because nobody likes that, but particularly the operators. But we communicated with them early, right, and we call them assists, and the operators are on board that what we're doing is actually valuable for them. So just back to the accounting thing, it is challenging to find the right metrics there to make the powers that be and their financial buckets feel like you're doing the right thing. But where we can point to a few major cases, and I'll get to them in the case studies here, that's been helpful for sure. So, and then the last thing I'd say is the other part of the relationship is there's a high response rate, I would say. We heard, I think it was Janet talking the other day about bespoke tools and tell us what you want in the software, right? We've been doing that and we're getting that to a certain degree, right? Now we're not directly changing the development schemes, but we are getting a lot of bespoke tools. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about in the case studies is bearing clearance. And we had embedded into SmartSignal now, we have what we call a bearing clearance consumption tool, which is basically monitoring, the original set point of the bearing clearance, and then how that's being, and aware of the space, right, the actual gap, and then how much gap can I lose before I'm concerned about rub, right? So rather than do the interpretations, we're getting like real-time, meaningful piece of data. Again, back to the importance of having a strategy that looks year over year about what the roadmap is, where you want to go. Right? So for us, the vision is the important thing, the fleet-wide predictive reliability capability that reduces forced outages and enables no surprise operations across renewables. That for us was the big thing. If I can air some dirty laundry, we have a lot of surprises. We have a lot of, oh, that broke, I had no idea that was coming. Right? Just again, you see that the OT isn't there. You see that we have remote operations in a lot of cases. We were getting a lot of surprises. And so what we really want to do is get to that no surprise operation, and we know that SmartSignal is an important part of that. So we have strategies and objectives that enable that, and then some goals for this year. And this is actually a 5-year roadmap. It's only funded for 3, so we got to show some value. But we have a 5-year roadmap that's going to get us through, and we're just in the middle of year 2 here right now and already showing some success. The business capabilities, again, that we're going after are advanced pattern recognition for reliability, predictive modeling, comprehensive view of asset health. We heard a lot about the asset health tool today. This for us is an important thing that we want to enable. We have a very lean team. We have essentially centralized anything that can be centralized and dropped down to one of whatever that is, right? So whether it's one performance engineer for the fuel, one reliability engineer for the fleet, we're getting a second one, right? But the pendulum is swinging. We are reestablishing a few of our functions a little more robustly. We have one generator specialist. We have one transformer specialist. We have people in the field that are looking after this on a day-to-day basis, right? Our field ops. But in terms of having someone to turn to when something goes wrong with a major piece of equipment, we really only have one specialist, and that person is centralized, right? So they're heavily involved in that, and they need a comprehensive view of asset health. We have 92 assets. We have like hundreds of transformers that are big enough to care about, right? We have a 5-year gap between the day that a transformer blows up and the next one shows up if you're not aware of that, right? Or maybe 4 years, whatever it is right now. So we need that comprehensive asset health view, right, for all of our major equipment. So that is something that we're trying to rebuild as well. Underperformance, analysis and diagnosis. In wind, there are all kinds of ways that a wind turbine can be underperforming and you don't know it, whether it's for too many trips, misalignment with the wind, being shaded or shadowed behind another wind turbine, or just, the pitch isn't working quite right. There's a lot that goes on in that space. We do want to integrate our thermal performance monitoring. So I'm looking for a thermal performance monitor engineer, okay? If anybody knows one and wants to send them to Calgary, I'm looking. But we do want to get that automated, right? I mean, the days of an engineer staring at a screen and flipping through all his models, like that's got to go, right? And I know that there's opportunities there. Data analysis, right? So we're getting into the advanced stuff here, but and then we want to fix our our maintenance strategies. Again, 27 wind sites, 3 or 5 different 17 different technologies. There is some optimization to be had. Those teams have been operating in silos. If we have the right data coming centrally, we can then turn around and make better maintenance strategies for those assets. So that's part of our accountability too. And then, of course, we want to be able to prioritize. So I mentioned the heating or overheating situation. We do not have the capital money to do everything all the time. Nobody ever does. And so for us, it's a question of, well, if a whole wind farm needs to have their bearings changed, where do we start, right? This is a 5-year program. Where do we start? And so that's been a useful part for us. Some of the future vision and goals for the, I'm not going to leave time for questions. Just quickly. So intelligent operations, I mentioned it. We're gonna bring everything together. Actually, we're actually intending to bring together. I mentioned the OT and the Advanced Monitoring Diagnostics already. We want to put that closer to our control centers. So for thermal, of course, you've got a control room, but for hydro and wind, we have control centers that operate the fleet from wherever they are. We want to get our M&D center embedded right in there, sitting next to those people so that they are a part of that function and no longer this bolt-on, viewed as a bolt-on, as a line item in the budget that can be struck, right? We want to get those people closer together so that they're making better real-time analyses and decisions. And the way I kind of draw it out of my mind is you've got a time spectrum. Your operators are dealing in the near term, your M&D center is operating in the near to mid-term, and then your performance and reliability engineers are operating in the long term, right? And they should all be operating off the same data set, right? So that's what we're looking for and why we're looking to move them together. Of course, that works with work management as well. How is the information leaving and coming back? Our asset information, our performance and reliability engineers, and our water management and optimization. Because I mentioned at the start, that is what drives our production on the hydro side. So we want to put that all together so that that giant hive mind is making the best operational decisions for the business in real time. It's ambitious. Let me go to the use cases. So quickly, this was one of our best wins in wind, and it came early. We had a vibration that became noticed. You see it here everybody knows how to read these curves, right? So green and the blue started to diverge. We weren't too sure why. We went and had a look, and it turns out that there was some issues with spalling and not enough grease in the one bearing. And so what we did, we did some boroscoping and discovered that there was, in fact, some damage in that space. They did some grease flushes, but what's not on this slide, and I don't mind sharing in this room, is actually the real problem was maintenance practice. Okay, and this is why I think this is neat. Maintenance practice issue was that there are 2 bearings on that unit, and rather than fill one with grease and fill the other one with grease, the technicians had developed a bifurcated dispensing tool. And so they did 2 squirts into a bifurcated tool, and you can imagine what happened. It didn't go evenly. This bearing was getting too much grease. This bearing was not getting enough grease. These main bearings cost anywhere from $500 to $1 million to replace. You've got to take the nacelle down. You've got to get up there. It's a big problem, right? And this was the practice across that site. So we were going to be on the hook for, I don't know, $40 million, something like that, if we hadn't discovered this. That's a big win, and that one carries some weight with the team, right? And of course, we extended the bearing life. We don't put that on here because we don't want to embarrass anybody in-house, but that's really what happened there. The hydro turbine lower guide bearing. So again, I mentioned that we've got this unit that runs at 160, but sometimes operates quite a bit lower. That unit is from the 60s, and there has been a change in the bearing over time. And we weren't entirely sure why, because of course documentation. And what we were noticing was that the bearing vibration was pretty excessive after an outage. And so this was a really neat animation. It shows you how these plots develop, how these bearing movements happen over time. And the way this populates over time is these ones come in and these ones come in, and then we have an outage, and then we come back and it starts populating up here. And you can tell right away that something has happened. And by the way, it looks like we're exceeding our bearing clearances in some cases. So there's another problem there. Long story short, that looked a lot like we were going to have to take an immediate, urgent outage, having just been in an outage, right? So you want to talk about no surprises, this happens a lot. And what we were able to do, again, because we're working really hard to conserve and manage water, we're also working hard to make money with that water, was we didn't want to take that outage in December, we wanted to take it in March or April. And so the M&D function gave us the confidence, because we knew, despite what the data was telling us, we knew that we weren't bouncing that unit around in its bearing. We knew that there was a little bit of clearance left there. And so we monitored it, right? We said, we're going into this thing one way or another, so we might as well cross our fingers, monitor it, and see what plays out. And so we were able to indeed monitor it, give the business the confidence to get all the way to end of March, and we took our outage at that time. So not a traditional use, but definitely a very valuable use for us that wouldn't have been available in the past. Yeah, so it's an oil whip issue. Oh, side note, records and information management. It turns out we did discover that the bearing had been changed in 1969 to a new design after there was an oil whip problem with the original bearing. There was no documentation of that available to us at the time, and so when we converted back to the other bearing, we got back to this oil whip problem, and nobody knew what or why. And then once we got through the outage, of course, somebody went and looked in a drawer and they found something that said that. So, you know, a little plug there for information management. Anyway, that's me. Thank you. Went a lot longer than I thought. Thank you very much.